Hey guys! Tonight we're gently marching into the surprisingly bureaucratic, yet profoundly sacred, world of the ancient Greek Olympic truce, specifically focusing on the unsung heroes who actually had to enforce it, the Heralds. Forget dramatic last stands or clever Trojan horses for a moment. Picture this instead. You're standing in the dusty agora, the central marketplace of a bustling Greek city-state, maybe Corinth or Thebes. Definitely not Sparta just yet. We'll get to their particular brand of hospitality later. The air smells of olives, dust, roasting meat from a nearby stall, and perhaps the faint whiff of political argument drifting from a nearby stoa. The most dramatic thing happening might be to merchants haggling loudly over the price of amphory, or a philosopher trying to explain the meaning of virtue to a particularly stubborn goat. But beneath this veneer of everyday life, there's a constant simmer, a low-level hum of rivalry, suspicion, and outright hostility towards your neighbors just over the next mountain range. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer boredom and frustration of trying to navigate the complex web of alliances, treaties, and petty grudges that defined ancient Greek intercity relations. It makes modern international diplomacy look like a playground squabble sometimes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support, like a well-timed offering to Hermes, helps keep these journeys into the past running smoothly. And please, feel free to post your current location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where these ancient whispers are reaching. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's surprisingly calm campaign together. Alright, let's set the scene properly. Ancient Greece wasn't one big happy country with a shared flag and a national anthem, though they sort of had shared gods and myths, which helps sometimes. It was a patchwork quilt of hundreds of independent city-states, or palaeas. Think Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, Argos, Megara. The list goes on and on. Each polis had its own government, its own laws, its own army, its own patron deity, and often its own deeply ingrained suspicion or outright hatred of several other palaeas. You might live just a day's walk from someone technically considered a fellow Greek, speaking a mutually intelligible dialect, worshipping mostly the same gods, yet view them as fundamentally foreign, potentially hostile rivals. It's like having hundreds of tiny, very proud, often very belligerent countries crammed into an area smaller than many U.S. states. Makes for interesting local festivals, but also for constant friction. Warfare between these city-states wasn't an occasional event. It was practically a seasonal activity. Like harvesting olives or complaining about the summer heat, conflicts typically flared up in the campaigning season, usually the warmer months after the spring planting and before the autumn harvest, when men weren't needed quite so desperately in the fields. These weren't necessarily wars of total annihilation, aiming to wipe another city off the map, though that sometimes happened. More often, they were about controlling border territories, securing trade routes, settling old scores, gaining prestige, or just because, well, that's what Argos always did in July. Think less world war and more extremely violent neighborhood dispute, involving heavily armed farmers marching out to bash each other over a contested fig orchard, or grazing rights for sheep. This near constant state of low-level and sometimes high-level conflict is a fundamental historical fact about the Hellenic world before the rise of larger empires. Like Macedon or Rome, it was the default setting. Peace was the exception, not the rule. You can imagine the atmosphere. You're a farmer near the border with, say, Megara, and you know that every summer, there's a decent chance some angry Megarians might stomp across your fields, help themselves to your goats, and maybe try to knock down your fence. Or you're a trader trying to get your pottery from Corinth to Athens, knowing you have to pass through territory controlled by people who really don't like Corinthians this year because of some argument over who cheated in last year's Isthmian Games. It breeds a certain tension, a constant looking over your shoulder. You might have elaborate local rituals or quirky superstitions specifically designed to ward off incursions from those particular neighbors, maybe burying specific herbs under your threshold facing their border, or avoiding saying the name of their city aloud after dark. Did it work? Probably not, but it might make you feel slightly better as you sharpen your spear just in case. Historians still argue about the precise economic and social drivers behind this endemic warfare. Was it primarily driven by population pressure and the need for more arable land? Or was it more about aristocratic competition, status seeking, and the cultural glorification of martial prowess? Or perhaps a complex interplay of all these factors, varying from region to region and era to era? The answer, as usual with history, is probably it's complicated, and depended very much on whether you were asking an Athenian philosopher or a Spartan hoplite, who would probably just grunt and polish his shield. So, you have this the backdrop, a world of proud, independent cities, constantly jostling for position, frequently resorting to armed conflict over matters large and small, bound by a shared culture and religion, but divided by fierce local loyalties and rivalries. It seems like a recipe for perpetual chaos, a situation where any large-scale, peaceful gathering involving people from multiple cities would be utterly impossible. How could athletes, officials, and spectators from Athens possibly travel safely through Spartan territory, or vice versa, to attend a major festival like the Olympic Games? How could you guarantee that sworn enemies wouldn't just use the gathering as an opportunity for an ambush or political assassination? It seems unthinkable, and yet, for centuries, it happened, all thanks to a sacred agreement and the surprisingly mundane, yet vital, work of the heralds who proclaimed it. The squabbling Greeks desperately needed a pause button, even if only temporary, and the gods, via the Olympics, provided one. Into this chaotic world of bickering city-states and seasonal warfare steps a figure of surprising calm and authority. Not a heavily armed hoplite bristling with bronze, nor a wily politician full of silver-tongued rhetoric. No, imagine instead a man, perhaps mature, perhaps bearing the lines of long travel on his face, walking steadily along a dusty road. He carries no obvious weapon, maybe just a simple walking stick, but clutched firmly in his hand is his badge of office, the symbol of his sacred duty, the Crackle or herald staff. He is one of the spondophoroi, the truce bearers, the men tasked with the crucial and potentially perilous job of announcing the Olympic truce across the length and breadth of the Hellenic world. Let's take a closer look at this herald. He's likely dressed simply, in practical traveling clothes suitable for walking long distances under the Greek sun. His authority doesn't come from impressive armor or a large retinue, though he might occasionally travel with a companion or two for safety or support. It comes entirely from the divine mandate he carries and the symbol he holds. The Crackle itself is significant, often depicted as a staff entwined with two serpents, sometimes topped with wings. It's most famously associated with Hermes, the messenger god, the swift traveler between worlds, the patron of heralds, merchants, and even thieves, which might occasionally be useful skills for a lone traveler. Holding this staff signifies that the bearer is unofficial, sacred business, and is under the protection of the gods specifically. In this case, under the protection of Zeus, king of the gods, in whose honor the Olympic Games were held. You can almost feel a subtle aura of "don't mess with me. I'm with the management" emanating from that staff. It's not a weapon, but it commands a different kind of respect. These spondophoroi were not just random messengers grabbed off the street. They were official heralds, often chosen from prominent families within Elis, the city-state that administered the Olympic Games. They needed to be men of good standing, reliable, articulate, and possessed of considerable stamina and diplomatic skill. Their role was deeply rooted in Greek tradition. Heralds had long served as inviolable messengers between warring parties, carrying proposals, arranging truces for burying the dead, or delivering formal declarations of war. Their persons were considered sacred. Harming a herald was a serious offense, not just against the sender, but against the gods themselves, particularly Hermes. This sacred status, this diplomatic immunity bubble, was absolutely essential for the spondophoroi to carry out their task across potentially hostile territories. You wouldn't want to be the polis known for roughing up Zeus's personal truce delivery guys. Bad cosmic PR. Their mission was specific and time-bound, starting several months before the Olympic Games were due to begin. Typically held every 4 years during the second or third full moon after the summer solstice. These heralds would set out from Elis. They traveled, often on foot, sometimes perhaps by boat for longer distances or island hopping, visiting every major city-state and many minor ones throughout the Greek world, from mainland Greece to the colonies in Sicily, southern Italy, Asia Minor, and even North Africa. Their job was to formally proclaim the Ekacheria, the sacred truce. This wasn't just a casual suggestion to maybe take a break from stabbing each other for a bit. It was a divinely ordained cessation of hostilities. This widespread proclamation journey is a key historical fact demonstrating the Pan-Hellenic reach and importance of the Olympic Games and their associated truce. It was one of the few institutions that truly united the fragmented Greek world, at least temporarily. Imagine the herald arriving at the outskirts of a city. He wouldn't sneak in. He would approach openly, his staff likely held high. He would announce his presence and purpose to the sentries or officials at the gate. He wasn't there to negotiate or debate. He was there to deliver a proclamation. His demeanor would likely be serious, dignified, reflecting the gravity of his sacred mission. He's not here to pick sides in your local squabble with the town next door. He represents something far older, far more universally acknowledged. He's the embodiment of a temporary, divinely sanctioned neutrality. The selection and training of these heralds must have been quite specific. Did they need to memorize the exact wording of the truce proclamation? Almost certainly. Did they need to know the customary diplomatic protocols for addressing the assemblies or magistrates of dozens of different cities? Absolutely. Were there perhaps quirky rituals or personal superstitions associated with their role? Maybe a herald always made sure to dip his staff in the sea before starting a journey for good luck. Or perhaps they avoided eating certain foods while on their sacred mission, believing it might compromise their ritual purity. Historians might debate the exact social standing and training regimen of the spondophoroi. Were they considered priests, diplomats, or something in between? Their unique role blended religious authority with practical diplomatic function. So, picture this calm, purposeful figure, the spondophoros, stepping onto the stage of intercity conflict. He is the quiet linchpin of the entire Olympic enterprise. Without him, and the respect accorded to his office and his message, athletes and spectators couldn't travel safely. the games couldn't happen, and one of the few unifying forces in the Greek world would crumble. He carries no bronze shield, only a staff entwined with serpents. But in his hands rests the fragile piece that allows the greatest celebration of Hellenic culture to take place. His journey is just beginning. Our steadfast herald, the Spondophoros, doesn't just rock up to a city gate and casually mention, "Hey, Olympics soon. Try not to kill each other, okay?" Oh no. This is ancient Greece. There are traditions, formalities, and a deep-seated respect for divine pronouncements. The message he carries, the ekateria or sacred truce, isn't a vague suggestion. It's a specific, binding agreement believed to be sanctioned by the gods themselves, particularly Zeus, king of the gods and patron of Olympia. Let's unroll, metaphorically speaking, the ancient scroll that contains this vital ceasefire. Imagine the ekateria not as a hastily scribbled note, but as a concept deeply embedded in religious and legal tradition. The word itself means a holding of hands or armistice, implying a mutual agreement to lay down arms. Its origins are shrouded in myth, often attributed to ancient lawgivers or even divine intervention to bring peace to the region. Around Olympia, the specifics of the truce were likely recorded, perhaps inscribed on a bronze discus kept at Olympia, or at least maintained through strong oral tradition and repeated proclamation. This wasn't some newfangled idea. It was an ancient, revered institution, the sacred bedrock upon which the games were built. The very existence and widespread acceptance of such a detailed, religiously backed truce is a cornerstone historical fact, highlighting the unique cultural significance of the Olympic Games and fostering a sense of shared Hellenic identity, even amidst political fragmentation. What exactly did the ekateria entail? Firstly, and most crucially, it mandated a cessation of all hostilities between Greek city-states for a specified period. This period wasn't just the few days of the games themselves. It extended for a significant time before and after, often lasting for several months. Some sources suggest up to 3 months. This extended duration was essential to allow athletes, their trainers, officials, and spectators safe passage from their home cities to Olympia and back again. Given that travel in the ancient world was slow, often on foot or by small ship, and could involve traversing potentially hostile territories, this long grace period was absolutely vital. You wouldn't want your star wrestler from Athens getting ambushed by a Spartan patrol, just because the truce only started the day before the opening ceremony. Bad for the wrestler, bad for Athens, and probably bad for the Spartans if Zeus got annoyed. The truce specifically forbade armies from entering Elis, the territory where Olympia was located. Elis itself was supposed to remain neutral and demilitarized, dedicated to the worship of Zeus and the administration of the games. Any armed incursion into Aeolian territory during the truce was a grave sacrilege. Furthermore, the truce protected not just the territory of Elis, but also all individuals officially traveling to or from the games. This included athletes, their entourages, judges, official delegations from various cities, merchants hoping to do business at the Olympic festival, and ordinary spectators. They were all, in theory, under the protection of Zeus and the ekateria once the truce was proclaimed. Think of it as a divine travel insurance policy, with very serious penalties for non-compliance. The proclamation itself, which the Spondophoroi delivered, would have been quite formal. It would likely invoke the authority of Zeus and the Hellenic priesthood, state the period during which the truce was in effect, and perhaps outline the penalties for violating it, which could range from hefty fines payable to the sanctuary at Olympia to More alarmingly, divine retribution. The idea of incurring the wrath of Zeus was not taken lightly. You might get away with cheating your neighbor in a land dispute, but cheating the king of the gods during his sacred festival, that was playing with thunderbolts. There might have been specific, almost legalistic details within the truce. For example, were there provisions for what constituted a hostile act? Did it just mean no large-scale invasions, or did it also cover minor border skirmishes, cattle raiding, or even overly aggressive heckling of rival athletes on their way to Olympia? Historians still debate the precise scope and interpretation of the Ekacheria in practice. How were disputes over alleged violations handled? Was there a specific arbitration process? Or did it rely more on the general fear of divine punishment and public condemnation? It's likely a combination of both, with the threat of religious sanction being a powerful deterrent. One quirky aspect might have been the specific language used. Greek city-states had their own dialects. Did the heralds deliver the proclamation in a standardized Olympic Greek? Or did they adapt it slightly to the local vernacular to ensure maximum clarity? Given the importance of the message, clarity would have been paramount. Perhaps they carried a version of the truce written in a few major dialects, just in case of particularly thick accents or linguistic pedants in the local assembly. Excuse me, Mr. Herald, but your pronunciation of cessation is more Ionian than Dorian. Does that invalidate the truce for us Dorians? Probably not a common occurrence, but you never know with ancient Greeks and their love of fine distinctions. So, this isn't just a friendly request. The Ekacheria is a divinely sanctioned, legally recognized, and widely accepted pan-Hellenic ceasefire agreement. It's a sophisticated piece of ancient international law, if you will, backed by the most powerful religious authority. It's the invisible shield that allows the Olympic dream to become a reality, transforming a landscape of warring factions into, for a few precious months, a realm where peaceful passage and sacred competition can, in theory, prevail. Our herald carries not just a staff, but the weight of this profound and surprisingly detailed agreement. The Ekacheria, that sacred scroll of ceasefire, is conceptually unrolled. The Spondiforoi, our calm and determined heralds, have received their commission from the Ellen authorities, perhaps after a solemn ceremony at the temple of Zeus in Olympia. Their staffs are in hand. The words of the proclamation committed to memory or carefully transcribed. Now, the real work begins, hitting the dusty, sun-baked roads of ancient Greece to spread the word. This isn't a quick email blast or a viral social media campaign. This is a slow, methodical, shoe-leather, or rather, sandal-leather operation. Imagine them setting out from Elis, perhaps in small groups of 2 or 3 for safety and companionship. Though some may have traveled alone, their routes would have been carefully planned, branching out to cover the vast Hellenic world. Some would head north into mainland Greece, towards Boeotia, Thessaly, and even Macedon, though Macedonian participation in the early Olympics is a topic of some debate among historians. Others would travel east across the Isthmus of Corinth, into Attica and towards the Aegean Islands and the Greek cities of Ionia and Asia Minor. Still others might take ships from ports on the western coast of the Peloponnese, sailing to the flourishing Greek colonies in Sicily and Magna Graecia, southern Italy, or even further afield to places like Serene in Libya or Massaoi in modern Marseille in Gaul. It was a truly pan-Hellenic undertaking, a testament to the far-reaching influence of the Olympic festival. You can almost see the map in your mind. Little lines of heraldic travel spreading out like a spider web from Olympia. The journey itself would have been arduous. Roads in ancient Greece weren't exactly Roman superhighways. They were often little more than rough tracks, winding through mountainous terrain, crossing unbridged rivers, and passing through dense forests or sparsely populated areas. The heralds would be walking for days, weeks, even months, under the blazing summer sun or facing unseasonal storms. They'd be carrying their own meager provisions, or relying on the hospitality or lack thereof they found along the way. This wasn't a luxury cruise. It was a grueling test of endurance, undertaken in the service of the gods and the games. You probably wouldn't last a week complaining about the lack of decent coffee shops en route. Their pace would be steady, deliberate. They weren't trying to break any speed records. Their goal was to reach every significant Greek community, deliver the proclamation, and ensure the message was understood and accepted. This methodical, unhurried progress is a key aspect of their mission. It allowed time for the news to disseminate, for cities to make their preparations, and for any potential disputes or misunderstandings about the truce to be addressed. Though the heralds weren't primarily negotiators, their presence could facilitate clarification. It also built anticipation for the upcoming games. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of the Olympic torch relay. But instead of a flame, they carried the promise of peace, and instead of sponsored tracksuits, they had dusty tunics and very tired feet. Along the way, they would encounter the full spectrum of ancient Greek life. They passed through fertile farmlands where peasants toiled under the sun, past shepherds tending their flocks on rocky hillsides, through bustling port towns filled with sailors and merchants from distant lands. They'd see temples sacred to a myriad of local gods and heroes, hear different dialects spoken, and observe unique local customs. This journey would have given the Spondophoroi an unparalleled, ground-level perspective on the diversity and complexity of the Hellenic world. They were trying to temporarily unite. It was a crash course in ancient Greek anthropology, whether they wanted it or not. What about the dangers? While their persons were, in theory, sacrosanct, the ancient world was not without its perils. Bandits were a known hazard on lonely stretches of road. Wild animals might still roam certain areas, and while direct, officially sanctioned attacks on heralds were rare due to the religious implications, there was always the risk of encountering jumpy border patrols from cities currently at war with each other, or getting caught in the crossfire of a minor skirmish that hadn't quite gotten the memo. About the impending truce, the herald staff was a powerful symbol, but it wasn't a magical force field. They relied on a combination of divine protection, traditional respect for their office, and probably a good deal of common sense and road wisdom. One quirky but practical consideration would be their footwear. All that walking, they must have gone through sandals at an alarming rate. Did they carry spares? Were they skilled at repairing their own footwear with leather scraps and a sturdy awl? Or did they rely on finding cobblers in the towns they visited? Historians studying the logistics of ancient travel often consider such mundane but essential details. The state of a herald's sandals might have been a surprisingly accurate indicator of how far he'd come and how much further he had to go. Look, Demetrios. This fellow's sandals are practically brand new. He can't have come further than Corinth. But old Theron over there, his look like they've walked to Sicily and back twice. So, picture them now. These solitary figures or small groups, dots moving slowly across the vast, rugged landscape of Greece and its colonies. They are the thread stitching together a temporary peace, the bearers of a sacred message that transcends local rivalries. Their journey is long, their path uncertain, but their mission is clear. The dusty road stretches before them, leading to the next city, the next proclamation. Another small step towards the fragile, divinely ordained calm of the Olympic Games. Our intrepid herald, or perhaps our small, dusty band of spondophoroi, finally arrives at the gates of a city-state. They've endured the rigors of the road, navigated the treacherous mountain passes, and perhaps even politely decline an offer to buy a slightly used chariot from a shifty roadside vendor. Now comes the crucial part, the formal proclamation of the Echecharia. This isn't a casual affair, shouted from horseback as they ride through. It's a specific, ritualized performance, designed to ensure the message is received with a proper solemnity and authority. Imagine the herald, having announced his presence and purpose to the gate guards, being escorted into the city. He might be taken to the agora, the central public space where citizens gathered, or perhaps directly to the council chamber or the meeting place of the city's ruling body. Be it a democracy, an oligarchy, or even a tyranny, the truce applied to all. Regardless of political persuasion, he would be given an opportunity to address the assembled citizens or their representatives. All eyes would be on him, this traveler from distant Hellas, bearing news of the gods and the games. You can almost feel the hush fall over the crowd as he prepares to speak. No checking your smartphone for notifications during this announcement. This is live and divinely mandated. The herald would then deliver the proclamation. The wording would be precise, likely unchanged from city to city to ensure consistency and avoid any misinterpretation. He would speak clearly, his voice carrying in the open air or the council hall, announcing the names of the gods, particularly Zeus, under whose authority the truce was declared. He would state the period of the Echecharia, specifying when it began and when it would end, ensuring everyone knew the exact time frame for this sacred piece. He would remind them of the obligation to allow safe passage to all those traveling to and from Olympia for the festival athletes, pilgrims, officials, everyone. And, crucially, he would outline the severe consequences of violating the truce divine displeasure, fines levied by the Olympic Council, and the shaming of their city in the eyes of all other Greeks. It's not just a suggestion. It's a sacred contract, and he's here to read out the terms and conditions very loudly and clearly. This formal, public proclamation in each city is a key historical element, underscoring the widespread, binding nature of the truce. It wasn't a secret deal between elites. It was a public commitment. The reception would vary. In most cities, the proclamation would be met with respect, even reverence. The Olympic Games were a hugely prestigious event, and participation, or even just attendance, brought honor to a city. Violating the truce was a serious religious and political transgression. The city officials would formally accept the truce on behalf of their citizens. This acceptance might involve a specific ritual, perhaps a public oath sworn by the magistrates, or a sacrifice made at a local temple to affirm their commitment. They are, in essence, signing on the dotted line of the divine ceasefire. Yes, Herald from Hellas, we, the good and currently slightly disgruntled with our neighbors people of Thebes, do solemnly swear to put down our spears and not prod any Corinthians with them, at least until the wrestling finals are over, and maybe not even then, if our guy wins. There might be questions, not of defiance, but of clarification. Honorable Herald, does the truce cover pre-existing sieges, or do we have to lift those too? Generally, yes, all active hostilities were supposed to cease. Or, what if some pirates, who clearly haven't heard your excellent proclamation, attack our ships carrying athletes? Is that on us? These practicalities would need to be understood. The heralds, while not full-fledged ambassadors empowered to negotiate treaties, would need to be well-versed in the traditional interpretations and scope of the Ekacheria to answer such queries. One quirky aspect might be the echoing of the proclamation. After the official announcement by the Spondiferos, local heralds or criers within the city might then repeat the proclamation throughout the various districts or to assemble military units, ensuring the message reached every corner and every citizen. It's like an ancient public service announcement, cascaded down through the local information network. Imagine the town crier, usually busy announcing lost goats or new taxes, now solemnly proclaiming, "Hear ye, no invading Argos for the next 3 moons. By order of Zeus and the sweaty guys from Elis." Historians still debate the exact mechanisms of enforcement beyond divine wrath and public shame. Were there specific earthly penalties if a city did violate the truce after formally accepting it? Fines were certainly levied by the Olympic authorities, and exclusion from future games was a powerful threat. The social pressure from other Greek states was also considerable. No city wanted to be known as the impious truce breakers. The debate often centers on how consistently these penalties were applied, and how effective they were against very powerful or very stubborn city-states. Once the proclamation has been made and formally accepted, the herald's job in that particular city is done. He might be offered hospitality, a meal, a place to rest for the night as a guest of the city, a recognition of his sacred status. Then, he would prepare to move on to the next town, the next valley, the next island, to repeat the process all over again. His voice, carrying the same solemn words, would echo in agoras and council halls across the Greek world, a constant, moving reminder of the impending peace, delivered politely but with the undeniable weight of divine authority. Each acceptance was another stitch in the fragile tapestry of the Olympic truce. Our tireless herald, having successfully proclaimed the Ekacheria in numerous more or less cooperative city-states, now faces a particularly interesting and potentially awkward stop on his itinerary, Sparta. You can almost feel a slight tightening in the herald's gut, a subtle straightening of his tunic. Sparta, the legendary militaristic powerhouse of Greece, a society built around discipline, austerity, and a profound dedication to the art of war. How would these famously laconic, battle-hardened warriors receive a message ordering them to stop fighting? It's like sending a health inspector to a greasy spoon diner, known exclusively for its triple bacon Heartstopper burgers. You expect a certain amount of skepticism. Imagine the herald approaching the outskirts of Sparta, not a city of grand walls and bustling agoras like Athens or Corinth, but more of a collection of villages spread across the Laconian plain, exuding an air of severe, unadorned strength. The men he sees are likely engaged in military training, their bodies honed, their expressions serious. There are no frivolous displays here, no idle chatter. Everything is geared towards martial excellence. He presents himself to the authorities, perhaps the ephors, the powerful elected magistrates, or even one of the 2 Spartan kings. The atmosphere in the Spartan assembly or council chamber would be markedly different from the more garrulous gatherings in other cities. Expect fewer flowery speeches and more curt, pointed questions. You wouldn't want to waste a Spartan's time with unnecessary pleasantries. They probably had a phalanx drill to get back to. The herald delivers his standard proclamation of the Olympic truce, invoking Zeus, outlining the period of peace, and detailing the protections for travelers. He watches the faces of the Spartan officials for their reaction. Would they openly scoff? Would they see it as a sign of weakness from other, softer Greeks? or would their deep-seated piety for Spartans, despite their martial focus, were also known for their scrupulous observance of religious duties prevail? This is a key moment. The participation, or at least the non-interference, of Sparta was crucial for the truce to hold any real weight across the Peloponnese. If Sparta decided to ignore the Echecharia, it would send a powerful message and potentially unravel the whole fragile peace. This historical tension between Sparta's militarism and its religious obligations makes their acceptance of the truce particularly significant. The Spartans, for all their focus on war, generally did respect the Olympic truce. Their own athletes competed in the games and often excelled, particularly in the more martial events, and the festival held deep religious significance for them as it did for other Greeks. However, their acceptance might come with less outward enthusiasm and more of a stoic, non-committal grunt that somehow signifies very well, the gods commanded. So we shall temporarily refrain from conquering our neighbors unless they really ask for it. You can imagine an ephor, after hearing the proclamation, simply nodding once, curtly, and saying, "Understood. We will observe the peace of the god. No grand feast of welcome for the herald here. Perhaps just a simple meal of their famously unappetizing black broth and a hard barley cake." Luxury was not the Spartan way, even for divinely protected messengers. There might be some underlying tension. Sparta had a history of occasionally being fined or even temporarily banned from the games for violations of the truce or for military actions deemed too close to the sacred period. So, the herald might be met with a certain wariness, a subtle scrutiny. Are they here just to announce the truce, or also to remind Sparta of past indiscretions? The herald, for his part, would need to be impeccably diplomatic, sticking strictly to his script, avoiding any hint of accusation or judgment. His job is to deliver the message, not to lecture the most formidable military power and grease on their behavior. That would be a career-limiting move, divine protection or not. One quirky, though perhaps apocryphal, images of the herald trying to make polite small talk with a group of Spartan hoplites during his brief stay. So, the herald might venture, looking forward to the games, thinking of entering the pancration, perhaps, and the hoplites just stare back, silently polishing their shields, their expressions unreadable. Or perhaps they offer a single, laconic reply like, "War is better training." Awkward. Historians often debate the nuances of Sparta's relationship with pan-Hellenic institutions, like the Olympic Games. Were they truly committed to the shared Hellenic identity these festivals promoted? Or did they participate primarily for reasons of prestige and to scout potential military rivals? The truth is likely complex, a mixture of piety, pragmatism, and a deep-seated sense of Spartan exceptionalism. Despite the potential for awkwardness, the herald's visit to Sparta is a crucial step. Once Sparta formally acknowledges the truce, it adds immense weight to the Echecharia throughout the Peloponnese and beyond. Other, smaller cities allied with or intimidated by Sparta would be far more likely to fall in line. The herald, having secured this vital, if perhaps slightly grudging, acceptance, can breathe a small, internal sigh of relief. He's faced the sternest test on his itinerary and emerged with the truce intact. He collects his staff, perhaps politely declines a second helping of black broth, and prepares to move on, leaving the Spartans to their rigorous training. Now temporarily redirected away from actual combat for a few months, the peace of Zeus, it seems, extends even to the barracks of Laconia. Having navigated the austere and potentially intimidating atmosphere of Sparta, our herald now sets his sights on another major power, and the Greek world. A city with a very different vibe, Athens. If Sparta was all about disciplined militarism and laconic pronouncements, Athens prided itself on its vibrant democracy, its flourishing arts, its philosophical debates, and its powerful navy. The Herald's reception here is likely to be more verbose, perhaps more outwardly welcoming, but no less crucial for the overall success of the Echacheria. Imagine the Herald approaching Athens. He'd see the imposing Acropolis rising above the city, crowned by the Parthenon, a testament to Athenian power and artistic achievement. He'd enter through bustling city gates, perhaps the Diplon Gate, and find himself in a city teeming with life merchants hawking their wares, citizens engaged in animated discussions in the agora, students hurrying to the lectures of famous philosophers, craftsmen busy in their workshops. The air here smells less of military discipline and more of sea salt from the nearby port of Piraeus, roasting lamb, and perhaps the faint aroma of intellectual ferment. It's a different world from Sparta, but one with its own set of complexities for a visiting truce bearer. You might get drawn into a 3-hour debate on the nature of peace itself. Before you even get to announce the actual truce, the herald would be brought before the Athenian assembly, the ecclesia, where all adult male citizens had the right to speak and vote, or perhaps to the Council of 500, the bull, which prepared business for the assembly. Here, the atmosphere would be lively, argumentative, and deeply political. The herald delivers his standard proclamation of the Olympic truce, invoking Zeus and detailing the terms. Unlike the curt Spartan acceptance, the Athenians might engage in some debate. Perhaps a prominent orator will seize the opportunity to make a grand speech about the importance of Pan-Hellenic unity and Athens' leading role in upholding sacred traditions, while subtly reminding everyone of Athenian naval power, of course. Or maybe a rival politician will try to score points by questioning some minor detail of the truce's application to Athens' current, probably complicated, foreign policy entanglements. It's democracy in action, and it can be a bit messy, even when dealing with divine decrees. Despite the potential for lengthy discussion, Athens, like Sparta, generally respected and upheld the Olympic truce. Athenians were enthusiastic participants in the games, both as athletes and spectators. The festival was a major cultural event, and Athens, as a leading cultural center, would want to be seen as a champion of such Pan-Hellenic institutions. The formal acceptance of the truce by the Athenian assembly would be a significant public act. This is a well-documented historical reality. Athenian commitment to the Olympic ideals, at least publicly, was strong. The Echacheria resonated with their own sometimes idealized notions of Greek unity and cultural superiority over barbarians. The herald might be invited to a more elaborate reception here than in Sparta, perhaps a formal dinner with city officials, where the wine flows more freely and the conversation is more philosophical. He might find himself seated next to a playwright discussing his latest tragedy, or a sculptor eager to get his opinion on a new statue of Hermes, patron of heralds. After all, it's an opportunity for the herald to engage in some informal diplomacy, to subtly reinforce the importance of the truce, and perhaps to gather some intelligence on the current mood and political climate in one of Greece's most influential cities. He is not just a messenger, he's also an observer, a conduit of information back to Ellis. You can almost picture him trying to politely steer the conversation back to truce compliance, while a philosopher tries to explain the concept of ataraxia using only a wine cup and some leftover olives. One quirky challenge for the herald in Athens might be navigating the city's famously litigious and argumentative populace, could an Athenian citizen try to sue the herald for, say, causing emotional distress by reminding them of a past Olympic defeat? Unlikely, given the herald's sacred status. But you can imagine some clever sophist trying to find a loophole. Honorable herald, your proclamation implies a cessation of all hostilities. Does this include particularly vigorous rhetorical attacks in the assembly? Because Demosthenes here was really laying into me yesterday, and it felt quite hostile. The herald would need a good sense of humor, or at least a very patient demeanor. Historians often contrast the Spartan and Athenian approaches to such Panhellenic obligations. Sparta's was often driven by a pragmatic piety and a sense of duty. Athens might be more infused with rhetoric, political calculation, and a desire to project an image of cultural leadership. Both, however, generally arrived at the same conclusion. The Olympic truce was to be respected. The debate might be whether Athenian adherence was more about genuine religious feeling, or about maintaining their city's prestige and influence in the wider Greek world. Once the speeches are made, the votes are cast, and the truce is formally accepted, perhaps with a decree inscribed on stone and set up in the agora for all to see. The herald can relax slightly. He's secured the commitment of another major player. He might enjoy the relative comforts of Athenian hospitality for a day or two, perhaps visiting the Acropolis or listening to a rehearsal at the Theater of Dionysus. Before shouldering his staff once more, the road still calls, and there are many more cities, large and small, that need to hear the sacred proclamation. But with Athens and Sparta on board, the foundation of the Panhellenic peace, however temporary, feels considerably more secure. Having secured the often verbose agreement of Athens and the more concise, but equally vital, ascent of Sparta, our herald's journey is far from over. The Greek world isn't just made up of these giants. It's a mosaic of hundreds of smaller city-states, each with its own fierce pride, its own local ambitions, and, almost inevitably, its own simmering feuds with its immediate neighbors. The Spondyphores must now navigate these often petty, but sometimes deeply entrenched, local squabbles, gently reminding everyone that the peace of Zeus for the Olympics trumps their desire to argue with the next village over who owns the particularly productive olive grove. Imagine the herald arriving in a smaller polis, perhaps somewhere in Boeotia or Thessaly, or on one of the many Aegean islands. He might not be greeted by grand assemblies or powerful efforts. Instead, he might find himself addressing a council of local elders in a modest town hall, or even just the leading citizens gathered informally in the shade of a plane tree. These cities might lack the military might of Sparta or the cultural prestige of Athens, but their adherence to the truce is still important. Widespread disregard by smaller states could undermine the entire principle of safe passage and peaceful assembly at Olympia. You can't have athletes getting waylaid by some overly enthusiastic local militia from a town you've barely heard of, just because they have a long-standing grudge against the athlete's home city over, say, a stolen prize goat from 3 generations ago. The herald delivers his standard proclamation, the familiar words echoing in yet another new setting. He emphasizes the Panhellenic nature of the games and the truce, the shared reverence for Zeus, and the benefits of peaceful participation. He's not here to take sides in their local disputes. His message is clear. Whatever your current tiff with your neighbors, it needs to be put on hold for the duration of the Echecheria. He's like a weary but patient teacher trying to get a class of unruly children to quiet down for an important announcement, appealing to their better, more pious nature. Yes, Phegalia, I understand Megalopolis looked at your prize-winning pig in a funny way last market day. But Zeus commands a pause in all pig-related hostilities for the sacred games. The challenge here is often not outright defiance of the gods, but the sheer intensity of local rivalries. These grudges could be ancient, deeply felt, and frequently reignited by minor incidents. The herald might find himself subtly reminding the citizens of a town that while their anger towards their neighbors from across the valley might be understandable from their perspective, at least, allowing it to disrupt the sacred truce would bring dishonor upon their city and potentially incur divine wrath, which is generally considered worse than enduring your neighbor's smugness for a few more months. This careful navigation of local sensibilities, while upholding the overarching authority of the truce, is a key historical aspect of the herald's diplomatic skill. It required tact, firmness, and an understanding of local psychologies. There might be some grumbling. Why should we observe the truce when those scoundrels from Day are clearly just using it as an excuse to build up their forces on our border? The local magistrate might complain. The herald would have to calmly reiterate that the truce applies to all parties, and that any violation by Day would also incur penalties. He is not a peacekeeper in the modern sense, with a blue helmet and a mandate to intervene directly. But his presence and his message serve as a powerful moral and religious deterrent. One quirky scenario might involve a city that is so small or remote that they haven't even heard of the last Olympic Games, let alone the upcoming one. The herald might have to give them a quick primer on what the Olympics are, why Zeus is keen on them, and why they really shouldn't be attacking any athletes passing through their territory. So, there's the big festival. See, lots of running and wrestling. Very important. Zeus gets quite upset if anyone spoils it. Just be nice to strangers for a few months, alright? It's like explaining a complex international treaty to someone who's only ever known village politics. Historians often marvel at the general effectiveness of the Echecharia even among these smaller, often fractious, city-states. While violations did occur, the overall framework of the truce held for centuries, allowing the games to continue as a major pan-Hellenic event. This suggests a deep-seated religious belief and a powerful social pressure that transcended local animosities, at least for a while. The debate might center on whether this compliance was driven more by genuine piety or by a pragmatic understanding that being seen as a truce breaker was simply bad for business and international relations in the long run. No one wants to be the pariah of the Greek world. So, the herald patiently makes his rounds from one small town to the next. He listens to their grievances, acknowledges their local pride, and then gently but firmly steers them back to the bigger picture. The peace of Zeus, the honor of the games, the unity of the Hellenes, however temporary and theoretical that unity might be. Each formal acceptance, even from the tiniest, most obscure polis, strengthens the web of the Echecharia. He's like a skilled weaver, patiently mending the frayed edges of a vast tapestry, ensuring that even the smallest threads hold firm for the sacred season. His journey is a constant exercise in gentle persuasion and divine reminder. Our herald, the Spondophoros, is more than just a messenger delivering a nicely worded request to please stop fighting for a bit. He and the staff he carries, the Crackle, are imbued with a surprising degree of power and respect, creating an almost tangible immunity bubble around him as he navigates the often treacherous landscape of intercity rivalries. This sacred inviolability is absolutely crucial to his mission, and is a fascinating aspect of ancient Greek religious and diplomatic custom. Imagine the herald, staff held visibly, walking a lonely road that forms the contested border between the city-states, currently engaged in a particularly nasty squabble. A heavily armed patrol from one of the cities spots him. Their initial reaction might be suspicion, hostility even, but then they see the Crackle. Their demeanor changes. They might still be wary, but they know they cannot harm him, cannot impede his progress, without committing a grave act of sacrilege. To lay hands on a herald, especially one on a mission for Zeus concerning the Olympic truce, was to invite disaster upon oneself and one's city. It was a line you simply didn't cross, like insulting someone's mother while they're holding a very large spear, but with added divine retribution. This concept of the herald's inviolability is ancient and deeply rooted in Greek tradition, predating even the formalized Olympic truce. Heralds were seen as being under the personal protection of Hermes, the messenger god, and by extension, the gods whose messages they carried. In the context of the Olympic truce, this protection was amplified by the association with Zeus, king of the gods and patron of Olympia. This sacred status meant that heralds could, in theory, travel through warring territories, cross enemy lines, and deliver messages to hostile parties without fear of being captured, tortured, or killed. This is a fundamental historical principle of ancient Greek diplomacy and warfare. The persons of heralds were sacrosanct. It's what allowed any form of communication or negotiation to occur between hostile entities. So, when our Spondophoros enters a city, even one that might be deeply resentful of Elis or hostile to the very idea of a truce, that benefits their rivals. He is generally treated with formal respect. He would be granted safe passage, an opportunity to deliver his proclamation, and often hospitality, however grudging or simple it might be, like that Spartan black broth we discussed. To refuse entry to an Olympic herald or to mistreat him would be a massive scandal, an affront to the gods that could lead to fines, exclusion from the games, and universal condemnation from other Greek states. It just wasn't worth the trouble. Better to let him say his piece, accept the truce at least nominally, and let him move on. This immunity wasn't just a passive thing. It was an active deterrent. If a city did harm or obstruct a herald, word would spread. Elis would protest vigorously. Other cities would take note. Divine punishment was expected to follow, whether in the form of military defeat, plague, famine, or just a series of really unfortunate goat-related accidents. The gods had long memories and a wide range of unpleasant ways to express their displeasure. You can almost imagine a nervous city magistrate, tempted to silence a particularly annoying herald, suddenly having a vision of Zeus frowning down from Mount Olympus, holding a thunderbolt with his name on it. On second thought, perhaps we will offer the esteemed herald our finest guest room, and a complimentary olive oil tasting. One quirky aspect of this immunity might have been its visual reinforcement. The Crackle itself was instantly recognizable. Some heralds might have also worn specific attire, perhaps a wreath or a particular style of cloak, that further identified them and their sacred role. It was like wearing a giant "do not attack" property of the gods sign. There could also be specific verbal formulas used by heralds when approaching a potentially hostile group, invoking the names of the gods to immediately establish their protected status. I come in the name of Zeus Xenios and Hermes Charax. Lower your spears and listen to the sacred word, or something slightly more formal and less action movie. Historians still explore the nuances and occasional breaches of this heraldic immunity. While generally respected, were there isolated incidents where heralds were mistreated, perhaps by rogue commanders or in exceptionally chaotic situations? And what were the precise repercussions? The historical sources, like Thucydides or Herodotus, sometimes mention disputes involving heralds, And these accounts help us understand both the strength of the tradition and the severity with which violations were viewed. The debate isn't usually about whether the immunity existed, but about its absolute effectiveness in every conceivable circumstance. Was it 100% foolproof? Or more like 99% effective with a small but terrifying margin for divine wrath? This immunity bubble allowed the spondyphora to perform their vital function. It was the invisible shield that enabled them to weave their way through a patchwork of feuding states, delivering the message of peace. Without it, the proclamation of the Ekateria would have been impossible, and the Olympic Games themselves might never have achieved their Pan-Hellenic significance. So, as our herald strides confidently, or at least with an outward show of confidence towards the next city, remember that his greatest protection isn't a bronze breastplate, but the awesome, intangible power of divine sanction and ancient tradition, all symbolized by that simple staff in his hand. He's banking on everyone else respecting the gods more than they hate their neighbors. At least for a little while. We've established the sacred immunity of our herald, the Spondophoros, and the profound importance of his mission. But amidst all this divine sanction and high-stakes diplomacy, let's not forget the sheer, unadulterated, and surprisingly mundane logistical realities of his journey. He's not magically teleporting from city to city, nor is he sustained by divine ambrosia alone, though a little of that probably wouldn't have gone amiss on a long, hot day. He is a human being, walking dusty roads, and that means dealing with the boring, everyday business of travel in the ancient world. Imagine the herald meticulously planning his route, or at least having it planned for him by the Ellen authorities. This wouldn't just be about the shortest distance between the points. He'd need to consider which cities needed to be visited in which order. The likely travel times between them, no Google Maps back then. Just experience and perhaps some rough local knowledge. And the availability of essentials along the way. His primary mode of transport is his own feet. Day after day, he's walking, probably covering a respectable but not superhuman distance each day, maybe 15 to 20 miles. Depending on the terrain and the urgency, you can almost feel the rhythmic slap of his sandals on the packed earth. The dust coating his tunic, the sun beating down on his broad-brimmed traveler's hat, the patassos. If he's wearing one, his Fitbit, had he possessed such a thing, would be logging some serious steps. Food and water are constant, pressing concerns, while he might be offered formal hospitality in the cities he visits. What about the long stretches in between? He'd likely carry some basic provisions, dried fruit, nuts. Hard barley cakes, a staple of ancient travel diets, not exactly gourmet, but filling. Perhaps a small skin of wine or water. He'd need to know where to find reliable springs or wells for refilling his water skin. Foraging might supplement his diet, edible berries or roots, if he knew what to look for. Or he might trade for food in small villages or at isolated farmsteads he passed, perhaps offering a small coin or relying on the traditional Greek concept of xenia, the sacred guest-host relationship. Though his status as a herald on official business might also command a degree of provision. Still, you wouldn't want to be caught miles from anywhere with a leaky water skin and only half a stale barley cake to your name. Shelter for the night is another major consideration. In larger towns and cities, he might be offered a place in a public guest house, xenon, or lodging with a prominent citizen, as befits his status. But on the road between settlements, he might seek shelter in a humble village inn, which could be of dubious quality and cleanliness. A wayside shrine or temple, many of which offered sanctuary to travelers. Or even sleep out in the open if the weather was fair and the area felt reasonably safe. He'd have a traveler's cloak, isomation, which could double as a blanket. Not exactly a five-star experience. You can imagine him carefully choosing his spot for the night, perhaps near a spring, trying to find a place sheltered from the wind, and always with one ear open for unfamiliar sounds. The gentle chirping of crickets would be a far more welcome sound than the snap of a twig nearby. And then there's the ever-present, though hopefully mitigated by his sacred status, risk of bandits. While his immunity bubble, remember that, offered protection from official aggression by city-states. Common criminals might be less impressed by a Herald staff if they thought he was carrying anything of value or if they were particularly desperate. This is why Heralds sometimes traveled in pairs or small groups, especially through known dangerous areas. This mundane concern for personal safety, even for divinely protected envoys, is a historical reality of ancient travel. The gods might protect you from armies, but a determined highwayman with a club might require a more earthly deterrent, or at least a swift pair of heels. What about personal effects? He'd likely be traveling light, his staff, a small satchel for food, and perhaps a change of tunic or some small personal items of whetstone. For his knife, a spare sandal strap, his water skin. Every ounce would count when you're carrying it all on your back for weeks on end. He wouldn't be lugging around a collection of souvenir olive oil presses from every city he visited. The simplicity of his needs and his kit underscores the dedication required for the role. One quirky but essential piece of kit might have been a good, sturdy walking stick, separate from his herald staff, used for balance on rough terrain, for fending off overly aggressive dogs, or even just for leaning on when taking a brief rest. Historians studying ancient depictions of travelers often note the ubiquity of the walking stick. It was the ancient equivalent of trekking poles, and perhaps he carried a small pot for cooking, or at least for boiling water if he was lucky enough to have something to cook. The logistics of even simple meal preparation on the road would be a daily challenge. So, while we admire the herald for his diplomatic skill and his sacred authority, let's also spare a thought for the sheer, unglamorous slog of his journey. The tired feet, the empty stomach, the constant search for water and safe lodging. These mundane aspects of his travel are just as much a part of his story as the formal proclamations he delivers. They are the quiet, often overlooked foundations upon which his crucial mission is built. He is not just a symbol, he is a weary traveler, putting one foot in front of the other, sustained by duty, barley cakes, and the hope of a reasonably comfortable place to sleep before the next dusty day dawns. Our herald, the Spondiferos, armed with his sacred staff, his well-worn sandals, and an inexhaustible supply of patience, generally finds his proclamation of the Echecheria accepted, albeit with varying degrees of enthusiasm or grumbling. But what happens if things get a little complicated? What if, during his very presence in a city, or in the immediate aftermath of his departure, someone almost violates the truce, or at least pushes the boundaries of acceptable behavior under its sacred umbrella? This is where the herald's role might shift from simple proclaimer to gentle persuader, or at least a very concerned eyewitness. Imagine the herald has just delivered his solemn announcement in, say, the city of Phlius, a smaller polis in the Peloponnese. The local magistrates have nodded gravely. Oaths have been sworn, or at least promises made. And the herald is perhaps enjoying a brief moment of rest before continuing his journey. Suddenly, a commotion arises. A group of Phliasian hotheads, still fuming over a recent border skirmish with their neighbors from Sicyon, have decided that travelers to Olympia doesn't necessarily include the one particularly annoying Sicyonian wrestler who always cheats. and they're making threatening gestures as he tries to pass through Phleasian territory. Or perhaps a Phleasian merchant, seeing a rival from a city they've been feuding with over trade routes, decides the truce doesn't cover aggressive undercutting of pottery prices during the sacred peace. It's not an outright declaration of war, but it's definitely not in the spirit of the Echecharia. The herald, hearing of this, can't simply ignore it. While he's not a policeman or a judge with direct enforcement powers, his presence carries weight. He might seek out the Phleasian magistrates again, his expression one of gentle but firm concern. Esteemed leaders of Phleas, he might begin, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. I understand there has been a misunderstanding regarding the passage of certain individuals. Perhaps we could revisit the solemn undertakings made just hours ago in the presence of the gods. He is not accusing, not threatening directly, but subtly reminding them of their obligations and the potential divine and panhellenic consequences of even a minor breach. He's relying on gentle persuasion, appealing to their piety, their honor, and perhaps their fear of being shamed or fined heavily by Olympia. This role of on-the-spot diplomat and moral compass is a crucial, if less formally defined, aspect of the herald's duties. He's the living embodiment of the truce, and his reaction to any perceived slight against it would be noted. The historical record does contain instances where cities were accused of violating the Olympic truce, sometimes in relatively minor ways, and the intervention or reporting by heralds would have been key in bringing these matters to the attention of the Ellen authorities. This wasn't just about big armies marching. It was about ensuring a pervasive atmosphere of peace and safe passage. What if the persuasion doesn't immediately work? What if the local hotheads are particularly stubborn, or the magistrates are secretly sympathetic to their cause? The herald doesn't have an army to back him up. His power lies in the sacredness of his office and the universal respect in theory for the truce. He might have to become more direct, though still maintaining a diplomatic tone. Gentlemen, such actions, if allowed to continue, could be interpreted by the council at Olympia, and indeed by Zeus himself, as a grave affront. The reputation of Phleas, and indeed its participation in the sacred games, could be jeopardized. That usually gets their attention. The thought of being barred from the Olympics, a source of immense prestige, or facing divine sanctions, was a powerful motivator. It's like being threatened with a very bad Yelp review from the gods themselves. One quirky challenge might be dealing with accidental violations. Perhaps a border patrol, not fully briefed on the exact timing of the truce in their specific remote sector, inadvertently detains a group of athletes for a few hours. Or maybe some overzealous customs officials try to levy an Olympic travel tax on pilgrims passing through. The herald would have to patiently explain, again, the precise terms and spirit of the Echecharia, smoothing ruffled feathers and ensuring the free flow of legitimate Olympic traffic. He's part diplomat, part rulebook interpreter, part weary school teacher. Historians still debate the exact mechanisms for resolving such minor or ambiguous disputes. During the truce period, was there a formal process for heralds to lodge complaints? How much discretionary authority did they have to interpret the truce on the ground? It's likely that much depended on the individual herald's experience, reputation, and diplomatic skill, as well as the specific political context in the city in question. The effectiveness of their gentle persuasion would vary. Sometimes, a quiet word was enough. Other times, a more forceful reminder of divine and earthly consequences might be necessary. The herald's goal in these situations is not to escalate conflict, but to diffuse it, to bring the situation back into alignment with the sacred peace. He's a calming influence, a voice of reason backed by divine authority. His presence serves as a constant reminder that, for these few months, the normal rules of bickering and hostility are suspended, and if gentle persuasion, backed by the fear of Zeus, is what it takes to ensure a wrestler from Sicyon can pass unmolested through Phlius, then that's what the Herald will patiently, calmly, and persistently apply. His mission isn't just to announce the peace, but to help nurture its fragile existence in a world more accustomed to war. Our Herald has delivered his proclamations, navigated the political complexities of Sparta and Athens, gently persuaded smaller feuding towns, and maintained his composure even when faced with potential minor infractions. He's done his human best. But what really underpins the effectiveness of the Olympic truce? What's the ultimate deterrent that makes even the most belligerent city-state generally toe the line? It's not the eloquence of the Spondiferos, nor his impressive walking staff, as symbolically potent as it is. It's the quiet, ever-present, and deeply serious understanding that the gods themselves are the guarantors of this peace. Imagine you're a magistrate in a city-state, and you're considering, just for a moment, whether you could get away with a swift, opportunistic raid on your neighbor's prize-winning olive groves. Even though the Herald has just announced the Echecharia, your military advisors might say it's a perfect opportunity. Your neighbor's best hoplites are probably already training for the pancration at Olympia. But then, a little voice, or perhaps the concerned frown of the local temple priest, reminds you, Zeus is watching, and Zeus, in whose honor these games are held, takes the sacred truce very seriously. This fear of divine retribution was arguably the most powerful enforcement mechanism of all. It's like having the ultimate, omniscient CCTV camera installed, and the security guard is the king of the gods, armed with thunderbolts. You'd probably think twice about stealing those olives. The ancient Greeks, for all their philosophical inquiries and political machinations, lived in a world where the gods were perceived as active and often interventionist forces. Natural disasters, plagues, famines, unexpected military defeats all could be interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. To deliberately flout a sacred truce, especially one so central to Pan-Hellenic religious life as the Olympic Echecharia, was to court such disaster. This belief in active divine oversight is a fundamental historical context for understanding the truce's power. It wasn't just a gentleman's agreement, it was a covenant with the divine, and breaking it had potentially catastrophic supernatural consequences. The sanctuary at Olympia itself was a potent symbol of this divine authority. It was one of the most sacred sites in the Greek world, home to a colossal gold and ivory statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The priests of Olympia, who administered the games and dispatched the heralds, were seen as servants of the god. Fines levied for truce violations were often dedicated to Zeus, sometimes used to erect statues or monuments at Olympia that served as public and permanent reminders of the offender's impiety. Imagine having a statue in the most sacred place in Greece with an inscription basically saying, "The people of your city here paid for this because they were naughty and broke Zeus's peace." The shame would be considerable and lasting. It's a divine naughty corner, displayed for all eternity. This fear wasn't just abstract. There were stories and legends, undoubtedly amplified by the Ellen priests and the heralds themselves, of cities or individuals who had defied the gods and suffered terrible fates. These tales served as cautionary examples, reinforcing the idea that messing with the sacred truce was a bad idea. Whether these stories were entirely factual, embellished, or purely mythological, they contributed to a powerful cultural narrative of divine justice. It's the ancient equivalent of this one weird trick the gods used to punish truce breakers. Number 7 will shock you. One quirky, yet telling detail is how seriously even seemingly minor ritual purity was taken in relation to sacred sites and festivals. Spilling blood even accidentally in a sanctuary or entering it in a state of ritual impurity could require elaborate purification ceremonies. Violating the Ekacheria was seen as a massive defilement, a pollution of the sacred time set aside for the gods. This religious worldview imbued the truce with a power that transcended mere political or military considerations. Historians still debate the precise balance between religious fear and pragmatic self-interest in motivating compliance with the truce. Was it primarily the fear of Zeus's thunderbolts, or was it the more earthly fear of pan-Hellenic condemnation, political isolation, and exclusion from the prestigious games which brought honor and potential economic benefits? Most likely, it was a potent combination of both. The divine threat amplified the social and political consequences, and vice versa. They were mutually reinforcing deterrents. The debate might focus on which factor was more influential for different city-states at different times. A deeply pious rural community might be more swayed by direct fear of the gods, while a sophisticated trading city like Corinth might also weigh the economic fallout of being ostracized. So, while our herald is the visible agent of the truce, the unseen guarantors are the Olympian gods themselves. Their silent, implied presence hovers over every proclamation, every oath of acceptance. The Crackle is merely a symbol of their far greater, far more formidable power. It's this underlying, unshakable belief in divine oversight and retribution that gives the Ekacheria its teeth, transforming it from a polite suggestion into a sacred obligation that, for the most part, even the most quarrelsome Greeks hesitated to defy. The peace wasn't just enforced by men in sandals. It was underwritten by the immortals on Mount Olympus. And that, ultimately, was its greatest strength. The heralds have done their work. The Ekacheria has been proclaimed from Elis to Ionia, from Sicily to the Black Sea. The fear of Zeus and hefty fines has, for the most part, settled a blanket of temporary peace over the normally fractious Greek city-states. Now, a different kind of movement begins, a quieter, more dispersed, but equally significant consequence of the sacred truce, the journey of the pilgrims, athletes, and spectators towards Olympia. Thanks to the herald's efforts, the roads are, in theory, safe. Imagine the scene not as a single, organized march, but as 1,000 individual streams trickling from across the Hellenic world, all converging on the sanctuary of Olympia and Elis. You might be a young athlete from Athens, accompanied by your trainer, and perhaps a proud father. Your hopes high for victory in the stadium race or the brutal pancration. You're traveling light, focused on your training regimen. Your diet probably a lot more barley cakes and figs, and your mental preparation. The herald's proclamation means you can worry less about being ambushed by a Spartan patrol on the Isthmus of Corinth and more about whether your pre-race olive oil rub is perfectly applied. It's a shift in focus from survival to competition. Or perhaps you're a wealthy merchant from Syracuse in Sicily, seeing the games not just as a religious festival, but as a prime business opportunity. You've loaded your ship with fine pottery, exotic goods, or perhaps just a lot of wine, hoping to sell to the thousands of visitors who will throng Olympia. The truce ensures your ship is less likely to be mistaken for a pirate vessel or an enemy combatant. As you navigate the sea lanes towards the Peloponnese, you're calculating profits, not worrying about being boarded by Athenian triremes. It's commerce under divine protection. Maybe you're a philosopher from Miletus eager to engage in debates with thinkers from other cities, or a poet hoping to recite your latest epic to a captive audience at the festival. Or you could simply be a curious farmer from a nearby Arcadian village, packing a few days' provisions, eager to witness the spectacle of the games for the first time, to see the famous athletes, and to soak in the atmosphere of this grand Pan-Hellenic gathering. For all these people, and thousands like them, the Echecharia transforms dangerous journeys into relatively peaceful pilgrimages. This safe passage, facilitated by the Heralds' work, is a crucial historical function of the Olympic truce, enabling the Games to be a truly international event for the ancient Greek world. You can't have a world championship if nobody can get to the stadium safely. The roads and sea lanes, normally arteries of trade, but also potential routes for invasion or targets for piracy, temporarily become corridors of peace. You might see groups of travelers from different, sometimes rival, city-states sharing the same road, perhaps eyeing each other warily at first, but bound by their common destination and the shared protection of the truce. An Athenian might find himself walking alongside a Theban, a Corinthian sharing a well with a Megarian. They might not suddenly become best friends, but for now, their usual animosities are suspended, or at least muted. The focus is on Olympia. It's like an ancient, divinely enforced carpool lane to the biggest sporting event of the era. Of course, safe is a relative term in the ancient world. The truce protected against organized military aggression between states, but it didn't magically eliminate all dangers. Bandits might still lurk in remote mountain passes, less concerned with Zeus's wrath than with a traveler's purse. Storms at sea were a constant threat, indifferent to sacred missions, but the primary danger being attacked or impeded by the official forces of another city-state was significantly reduced. This allowed for a scale of travel and congregation that would otherwise have been unthinkable. One quirky aspect of this travel might have been the development of informal Olympic routes, well-trodden paths known to be relatively safe and equipped with inns or springs, favored by those heading to the Games. Perhaps certain villages along these routes became famous for their hospitality, or their exorbitant prices for bread and water during the Olympic season. Local guides might have offered their services, promising the quickest or safest way through a particular mountain range. Now with the added assurance of the truce, follow me, noble sirs, for a small fee. I'll get you past the sleeping dragon pass before the Spartans even finish their morning drills. And the truce guarantees they won't even scowl at you. Mutt, historians studying the social and economic impact of the Olympic Games, often emphasize this mass movement of people. Olympia became a temporary metropolis every 4 years, a melting pot of dialects, customs, and ideas from across the Greek world. This was only possible because of the Echecharia, diligently proclaimed and generally respected, creating those surprisingly peaceful travel corridors. The heralds didn't just announce a ceasefire. They opened the roads, paving the way, quite literally, for one of antiquity's greatest cultural phenomena. The debate might be about the volume of this travel, just how many thousands actually made the journey, and what was the demographic makeup of these pilgrim spectators. So, as you settle deeper into your rest, picture these converging streams of humanity, athletes striving for glory, merchants seeking profit, poets seeking an audience, and ordinary folk seeking spectacle and a connection to their shared gods and culture. They move with a newfound confidence, a sense of security underwritten by the herald's pronouncements and the watchful eyes of the gods. The dusty roads, for a brief, sacred period, are paths of peace, leading all to the sacred grove of Olympia. The heralds have completed their arduous circuit, their voices perhaps a little hoarse from countless proclamations. The Echecharia is in full swing, and pilgrims and athletes are making their way towards Olympia, enjoying the relatively peaceful travel corridors. But a truce, like any agreement, has its terms and conditions, its start and end dates, its fine print. Let's delve, just for a moment, into the slightly less thrilling, but absolutely crucial terms and conditions of this divine ceasefire, the truce timing, and its technicalities. It's not as exciting as a chariot race, but without these agreed-upon details, the whole thing could unravel into a he said, she said of Olympian proportions. The duration of the Echecharia was, as we've touched upon, quite substantial. It wasn't just for the 5 days or so of the actual games. It needed to cover the travel time to and from Olympia for participants and spectators. Coming from the furthest reaches of the Greek world, from Sicily, from Asia Minor, from the Black Sea colonies, ancient sources suggest the truce could last for 1, 2, or even commonly 3 months. This extended period is a key historical feature, underscoring the logistical realities of ancient travel and the pan-Hellenic scope of the games. You couldn't expect an athlete from Marseille to pop over for a quick javelin throw and be back home in a week. It was a serious time commitment, requiring a correspondingly serious truce duration. When exactly did it start? The Spondiforua would set out from Elis at a specific time, often cited as being around the time of the new moon preceding the games, or a set number of months before the festival. The truce would officially begin in each city-state as soon as the herald formally proclaimed it there. This created a kind of rolling start to the peace. A city close to Elis might enter the truce period weeks before a distant colony in Ionia heard the proclamation. This staggered commencement makes perfect sense. You can't be bound by a truce you haven't officially been told about yet. It's like waiting for the official notification to pop up on your divine messaging system. The end of the truce was equally important. It wouldn't just stop abruptly the moment the last olive wreath was awarded. There needed to be sufficient time for everyone to travel home safely as well. So, the Echecharia would extend for a period after the games concluded. This meant that, in total, a significant chunk of the campaigning season, that prime time for ancient Greek cities to bash each other, was effectively declared off limits every 4 years. You can imagine some particularly warlike general impatiently tapping his spear, looking at his sundial, waiting for the official truce expiry moment, so he can get back to the business of besieging his neighbors. Is it over yet? Can we invade Megar now? No. Still 2 more moons? Drat. One slightly quirky technicality might have involved how the month was defined. The ancient Greeks used various lunar or lunisolar calendars, which could differ from city to city. Did the truce specify 3 Olympic moons as defined by the Ellen calendar? Or did each city calculate it based on their own local system? Given the potential for confusion and deliberate misinterpretation by someone eager to restart hostilities a bit early, it's likely the Ellen definition, tied to the cycle of the games, was paramount. The Heralds might have even carried a sort of official Olympic calendar, or at least clear instructions on how to calculate the truce period accurately. Consistency would be key to avoiding accidental early resumptions of warfare. What about pre-existing conflicts or sieges? Generally, the understanding was that all active hostilities had to cease. If you were in the middle of besieging a city when the herald arrived and the truce was proclaimed, you were expected to pack up your siege engines and go home, or at least maintain a peaceful standoff. This could be intensely frustrating for the besieging army if they felt they were on the verge of victory. But defying the truce in such a blatant way was a huge risk. This absolute cessation of ongoing wars, not just the prevention of new ones, is a significant aspect of the truce's power. It really was meant to be a total pause. Historians sometimes debate the precise legalistic interpretations of certain truce conditions. For example, did the truce prevent cities from engaging in diplomatic maneuvering or forming new alliances? That might be detrimental to others, even if no actual fighting took place. Or was it strictly about the cessation of physical violence? The ancient sources aren't always explicit on such fine points, leaving room for scholarly interpretation. It's likely the primary focus was on preventing bloodshed and ensuring safe travel. But the spirit of the truce probably discouraged overly aggressive political machinations as well, though that would be harder to enforce. The officials at Olympia, the Hellenodikai judges of the Greeks, also played a role in overseeing the truce. They had the authority to impose fines on cities or individuals who violated it, and even to exclude them from participating in or attending the games. This judicial power, backed by the religious authority of the sanctuary, provided an earthly enforcement mechanism to complement the fear of divine retribution. So, it wasn't just the heralds and the gods. There was an actual Olympic court, in a sense. Understanding these technicalities, the long duration, the rolling start, the comprehensive cessation of hostilities, and the mechanisms for oversight is crucial for appreciating the Echecharia not just as a noble idea, but as a practical, functioning system. It was a remarkably sophisticated piece of ancient international relations, designed to create a predictable and relatively secure environment for a cherished Pan-Hellenic tradition. The heralds weren't just announcing a vague wish for peace, they were activating a detailed, time-bound, and divinely sanctioned contract, with clear, if sometimes slightly flexible terms and conditions. The last race has been run at Olympia, the final olive wreath bestowed upon a triumphant, sweaty athlete. The echoes of cheers and the aroma of sacrificial feast are beginning to fade from the sacred altar. The great Pan-Hellenic festival is drawing to a close. For our Spondophoroi, their primary mission proclaiming the Echecharia and ensuring its observance during the lead-up to and duration of the games is largely accomplished. But their role isn't quite over, and the peace they so diligently announced is, by its very nature, designed to gently dissolve, allowing the Greek world to return to its usual, often quarrelsome state. As the crowds begin to disperse from Olympia, athletes, spectators, merchants, and philosophers begin their journeys homeward. They are still, for a while, under the protection of the departing Olympic truce. The heralds, or perhaps a new set dispatched from Elis, might even travel along some of the major routes, not proclaiming the truce this time, but perhaps subtly monitoring its continued observance during this wind-down period. Their presence would be a quiet reminder that Zeus's peace still holds, even if the party is over. It's like the cleanup crew at a big festival, ensuring everyone gets home safely before the normal rules of the road and intercity rivalry fully resume. The official end of the Echecharia would be as clearly defined as its beginning, perhaps tied to a certain number of days or moons after the conclusion of the games. As this date approaches, you can almost feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere across the Greek world. The temporary restraint begins to loosen. Generals might start dusting off their campaign plans. City councils might resume heated debates about the contested border territory. The grievances that were politely or not so politely shelved for the sake of the gods. And the games begin to resurface. It's like a collective, slightly grumpy awakening from a pleasant but enforced nap. All right, that was nice. But back to bickering. Everyone, the heralds themselves, their long mission completed, would eventually return to Elis. They would report to the Olympic authorities, perhaps detailing which cities accepted the truce with particular enthusiasm, which were a bit grudging, and any minor incidents or concerns that arose during their travels. This information would be valuable for planning the next cycle of proclamations in 4 years' time. Their return signifies the formal closure of the particular Olympic peace cycle. They have woven the tapestry of truce, watched over it, and now they witness its careful unraveling. This return and debriefing, though less dramatic than the outward journey, is a logical concluding part of their historically significant duties. What happens next is, in many ways, a return to the status quo. The city-states, having demonstrated their piety and participated in a shared Hellenic cultural experience, would often revert to their old rivalries with surprising speed. The peace of the Echacheria was profound, but it was also understood by all to be temporary. It wasn't intended to solve underlying political disputes or create lasting alliances, though sometimes the shared experience at Olympia might foster some goodwill, at least for a while. Its purpose was specific, to allow the games to happen. Once the purpose was fulfilled, the normal patterns of ancient Greek life, including warfare, would resume. It's a slightly cynical view, perhaps, but a realistic one. One quirky aspect might be the grace period immediately after the truce officially ends. Would a city launch an attack the very next day? Or would there be a sort of unspoken understanding to ease back into hostilities gradually? Perhaps a few days of aggressive posturing before anyone actually throws a spear. Or maybe some cities, particularly eager to settle a score, had their armies practically camp on the border, counting down the hours with a sundial. 3, 2, 1. Charge! The truce is over, lads. Historians often ponder the long-term impact of the Echacheria. Did this regular, enforced period of peace, repeated every 4 years for centuries, have any cumulative effect on reducing overall levels of conflict in the Greek world? Or was it simply a temporary pause in an otherwise relentless pattern of warfare? The scholarly debate continues. Some argue that it fostered a sense of shared Greek identity and provided a recurring mechanism for peaceful interaction, which may have had subtle, long-term benefits. Others maintain that it was too limited in scope and duration to fundamentally alter the deeply ingrained political fragmentation and military rivalry of the Peleus. It likely did a bit of both, a powerful symbol of unity that nonetheless couldn't entirely overcome the realities of a competitive, multipolar world. So, our heralds, their sandals worn thin, their voices tired, have done their part. The sacred peace they proclaimed has served its purpose. The athletes have competed, the gods have been honored, and the Greek world has, for a brief shining moment, laid down its arms in shared reverence. Now, as the final echoes of the Echacheria fade, the familiar sounds of political debate, military preparation, and intercity squabbling begin to rise once more. The mission is accomplished, the temporary peace gently dissolves, and everyone gets ready to go back to the surprisingly serious business of being a fiercely independent, often argumentative, ancient Greek city-state, until, of course, the heralds set out once more in 4 years' time to begin the cycle anew. The dust settles on the roads that led to and from Olympia. The last of the travelers, their hearts perhaps still carrying the thrill of the games or the solemnity of the sacred rites, have reached their homes. The herald staffs, those potent symbols of divine authority and temporary peace, are carefully stored away in Elis, awaiting their next journey. A great stillness descends, not just upon the sanctuary of Olympia, but across the Hellenic world, a different kind of stillness now, Not the enforced quiet of the Echacheria, but the quiet of anticipation as cities turn back to their own affairs. The olive groves that were once safe passages might now be eyed with renewed suspicion by neighboring patrols. The mountain passes, recently filled with peaceful pilgrims, might once again become strategic choke points. The arguments over land, trade, and honor, so dutifully paused, begin to murmur anew in council chambers and agoras. The brief, shining interlude of Pan-Hellenic concord, so diligently proclaimed and generally observed, gives way to the familiar patterns of regional ambition and local rivalry. Yet, something lingers. The memory of the shared peace. The image of Greeks from warring states competing honorably under the watchful eyes of the gods. The echo of the heralds' voices proclaiming a common, sacred law. These things do not vanish entirely. They become part of the collective consciousness. A recurring reminder that even amidst division and conflict, a higher unity, a shared heritage, is possible, if only for a season. The Echacheria, though temporary, planted seeds of a larger Hellenic identity. The sun sets over the mountains of Arcadia and the plains of Laconia. The temple stands silent under the stars. The gods, their festival duly honored, perhaps turn their attention to other mortal affairs. Or maybe just enjoy the relative quiet after so much athletic exertion and human clamor. The great, cyclical rhythm of ancient life continues, war and peace, festival and daily toil, each in its appointed time. And as you drift now into your own peaceful slumber, let the image of those steadfast heralds, walking their dusty roads for the sake of a sacred truce, remind you that even the most boring and methodical efforts, undertaken with dedication, can lay the foundation for moments of profound peace and shared celebration, fleeting though they may be, like whispers of calm across ancient, restless lands.